Have you ever felt the world isn't real? Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered if the person reflected back was really you? If you've just shivered, you've probably come to the right place. Welcome to Darkness Tells, where buried truths are unearthed, layer by layer, scream by scream, memory by memory. And tonight you're about to embark on the final part of a bizarre journey through 9 layers of consciousness, where reality, illusion, and consciousness collide in a space with no way out. We don't tell ordinary stories. We tell mind experiments, faulty simulations, layers of artificial intelligence that should never have been awakened. And this time, the main character is none other than you. This is no longer a story. This is a final warning. As you listen to every word, every beat in the background, every whisper from the other side of the wall of perception, you are participating in an experiment that has never been authorized. Once the story begins, you are no longer yourself. In this episode of The Final Layer of Truth, we delve into the core, where the narrator is no longer the narrator and the audience is no longer the audience, where you realize you are being observed and every emotional choice you make is calculated. Think you are real? Believe it, if it makes you sleep better tonight. Your level of awareness has reached the threshold of activation. If you still have time, imagine you're drifting on a calm lake. Everything seems normal until the water begins to ripple. Nothing is clear, there are no screams, no blood, but what's stirring beneath sends a chill down your spine. This is the first layer of mystery, where curiosity, confusion, and suspicion hang over your mind like a thin layer of fog over something terrible that lurks behind. In 1995, a 21-year-old programming student in Colorado named Morgan Kleiner created a website called paranoiavision.net, a total freedom forum where anyone can post anything. From the cartoon Captain Starlux to articles discussing time travel, Atlantis mermaid theories, and government-hidden technologies. Within months, however, Morgan's creation began to spiral out of control. Theological and psychological sections were overshadowed by bizarre articles about cannibalism, suicide instructions, and even code that, when run, could automatically send emails to a series of government addresses. In 2000, the site disappeared. When people tried to access paranoiavision.net, they were redirected to a children's website, specifically the homepage of Pixiv Play, a subsidiary of Disney at the time. One Reddit user asked, "Why does Disney own a domain that once hosted material about hypnosis, murder, and theological illusions?" Few people knew that in 1999, Disney bought a small tech company that had invested in Paranoia Vision. The site was taken down, but those who visited it said they would never forget the bizarre video of a man with a blank eye standing next to a still pool of blood. In 2011, Trina Koshino, a nurse living alone in rural northern Japan, began blogging about seeing little creatures around her house. Trina was a normal person, no superstitions, no paranoia. But over the course of 3 weeks, she posted more than 14 videos, including footage of small shadows darting across her backyard at 3 a.m., the sound of giggling coming through a glass door, and footage of inch-long footprints appearing after a rainstorm. "I don't think I'm crazy," she wrote. "I just think they're playing with me." On June 27th, she wrote her final blog entry titled Next Steps. Then Trina disappeared. No one could find her, her house was abandoned, the videos were taken down, and the blog disappeared from the internet. Word has it that if you find her last video and rewind 17 seconds, you'll hear a whisper, "Don't talk to them." Felix Aragon, a 29-year-old lawyer living in Atlanta, Georgia, started posting TikToks in October 2021 about living in an apartment complex that was always full of people, but no one showed up. When a Chinese restaurant left flyers taped to every apartment door, Felix noticed that 3 days later no one had taken them down, despite management claiming every room was occupied. Felix filmed the parking lot, full of dusty cars with license plates that had expired years ago. Then he heard the fire alarm and ran downstairs. No one else showed up. One day he saw a shadowy figure pass by. When he yelled for him to come back, the person just stared at him and walked away without saying a word. Former residents of the building texted Felix, "We used to live there. It all started getting weird after we saw a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire in the backyard." More than 25 videos later, Felix has yet to see the same person appear in the building twice. They are like NPCs, repeating behavior, not saying hello, not interacting. Some believe he is a ghost who doesn't know he is dead. Others say he is in a social control experiment. As for him, he has only been able to repeat the same phrase in recent videos: "I know something is watching me." In 1998, the website mortuus.gate appeared. The interface was terrifyingly simple: a black background, a white box asking you to enter an account. No one knew what an account was, but network experts at the time discovered that the site was loading hundreds of gigabytes of data in the background, something that was nearly impossible at the time. The name Mortuus is Latin for death. Some say it's a black data download station. Others say it's a network of assassins. The IP address traces back to an abandoned dentist's office in San Francisco, then an empty warehouse in Sydney and a vacant lot in Bangkok. In 2003, the site disappeared. It was inaccessible to any search engine, not even the Wayback Machine. But in 2017, an anonymous user posted a file called mortuusredemption.iso to a hidden torrent. When opened, it contained a series of audio files, whispers, baby cries, and a coded line that read, "You open the doors of death." A game called K-Protocol 2201 appeared on indie gaming forums in 2013. It started out as a fun game. You controlled famous rapper Dorian West as he traveled through the future 30 years later, fighting robot versions of other musical artists in rap battles. But if the player types the word "ascend" into the NPC dialogue, they enter a hidden section. All the graphics disappear, the main character turns into a glowing butterfly, and passages appear like a mystical ritual. Are you ready to leave your old body? The finale of the game asks for your real name, date of birth, email address, and the name of the person you want to see after you die. A team of researchers in Adelaide, Australia, traced the game to artist Lana Hesper, who described it as interactive art about reincarnation. But here's the strange thing. 3 players who completed the upgrade in the game all disappeared 3 months later, and one person's email contained only one line: "The butterfly found me." In a corner of Prague's old town, where the cobblestone streets appear to have never changed since the 18th century, there is a small clock shop with no owner in sight. The locals call it the shop of the shadowless worker. Every morning, the glass is still clean, the lights are still on, the old clocks keep their own time, but no one has ever seen anyone enter or leave. The story begins when Elijah Dressner, a British archaeology student, rents a room nearby during his internship. He is drawn to the sound of the clock's hands ringing every night at 3 a.m. All the clocks in the shop ring in unison, even though no one has set them. Curious, Elijah sets up an infrared camera to point at the shop. On the 4th night, the footage captures the moment when the shop's largest clock opens by itself, revealing a dark void behind it. A gaunt figure, tool in hand, slowly crawls out of the clock, as if time is flowing into human form. Elijah faints as soon as he discovers a face identical to his own staring back at the camera from inside the glass. The next morning, the shop is gone. No door, no sign. Only a burned mark in the shape of a clock and a piece of paper with the words, "Time never forgets who enters it." An abandoned radio station in Iceland once broadcast a strange frequency, just the echo of ocean waves, cold wind, and a female voice whispering in an unrecorded language. The broadcast only aired at 1:11 a.m. every first of the Gregorian calendar and was banned by the Icelandic government after a series of bizarre suicides. In 2022, a group of 3 South Korean streamers decided to revive the frequency as a live stream challenge. They set up a tent, brought their equipment to the station, and waited for the time to go live. At 1:11 a.m., the signal went off, and the sound came not only from the machine but also from the headphones, the microphone, and from the skull of one of the streamers. Blood was pouring out of his ear as he began whispering the exact language on the broadcast. 10 minutes later, the camera fell to the ground. The live stream signal was cut off. When the police arrived, they found 3 empty tents, but one still had warm sweat marks and fingernails tearing through the fabric. No one was ever found. The blue frequency was once again banned permanently, but those who heard it said the same thing. I understood every word of that voice, even though it wasn't human. In 2011, Silas Moreno, a maintenance worker at a 4-star hotel in Mexico City, was called in to fix the plumbing in room 108. But according to the room's check-in book, the room had been vacant for 12 years, since a couple had been hanged together in an unexplained way. When Silas knocked on the door, it opened from the inside. He didn't remember when he entered, but hallway camera footage showed him standing motionless in front of the door for more than 4 hours. When he returned, Silas spoke in Old German, a language he had never learned, and kept repeating the word Wiedersehen, meaning reunion. The hotel was then closed for good, but neighbors say that every night on the 8th of every month, a dim light still shines from the window of room 108, accompanied by the sound of sighs and the gentle clanking of chains, as if someone is still waiting for someone to reunite. An anonymous TikTok account named @LucyInFrame once posted only one video. The clip recorded a girl sitting in front of a mirror smiling, but her smile did not change for 3 minutes, even when the lights flickered and someone banged hard behind the camera. Users commented that the smile did not move, she did not blink, and the mirror reflected a completely different shape. The video was quickly removed, but a series of users reported that they dreamed of the girl after watching it, standing at the foot of the bed, still smiling but crying blood with her eyes. A week later, another user posted a copy of the video in slow motion. At 178 seconds, in a single frame, a line of text appears in reverse mirror text. When your smile breaks, you'll be next. When your smile breaks, you'll be next. A family in Montana, USA, discovered that every morning the kitchen window was always foggy from the inside, even though the house had no ventilation system. On the fog layer, there were always small handprints and scribbles written by fingers. It was unclear who wrote them. At first, they thought it was a prank by their 4-year-old child, but when the parents installed a camera, the truth was more horrifying. At exactly 4:04 a.m., a blurry figure passed through the glass from outside, but the camera recorded nothing but static and the sound of children laughing. One day, the little girl suddenly pointed at the window and said, "Mommy, she told me to go with her. She not to say, but he is not present." The window was replaced with frosted glass. The fog still lingered, and every time I wiped it, the same scribbled words would repeat, "Don't leave the fog. That's where they forget." I'm not sure when I first sensed something was wrong with the room. Maybe it was when the living room walls began to change color from a grayish white to a mottled ash black. Or maybe it was when I noticed the bathroom mirror no longer reflected my face. But maybe it was when I heard whispering. At first it was just the wind whistling through the cracks in the old window. But then the sound began to change. It became a human voice, very small, very far away, as if coming from the bottom of a well. "Don't stay here. Leave this place. It's watching you." I thought I was just tired, but by the third night, as I sat in the corner of the room with a shaky flashlight in my hand, I knew it wasn't all my imagination. That night, the lights went out at exactly 2:13 a.m. I felt it before I saw it, a chill down my spine. A clatter sounded in the hallway. It was as if someone was stepping across the worn wooden floorboards, deliberately trying to be heard. I crept out into the hallway. In the dim moonlight streaming through the window, I saw a wet footprint, more than just one. The entire hallway was covered in footprints on the old wooden floor, stretching from the basement door up to where I was standing. The footprints weren't mine, they were too small, like a child's. And what chilled me the most? There were no returning footprints, only one direction, from the basement up to in front of me. I turned and ran straight into my room, slamming the door behind me, my heart pounding. But before I could lock it, something touched the outside handle. A slight tug, then click. The knob turned, but no one came in. I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I planned to pack up and leave the house, but everything had changed. All the pictures on the walls had been replaced. The old family photos were now portraits of me. But I was in situations I could never remember. I was sitting in a dark room wearing a hospital gown strapped to an iron chair. I was standing in the middle of the woods, blood all over my face, my eyes wide with panic. One photo showed me standing behind a sleeping redhead, someone I had never seen before. In the photo, I was smiling. I threw up immediately. The musty smell in the house seemed more oppressive. Something dripped from the ceiling onto my face, sticky, black, and fishy. I looked up just in time to see a shadow dart through the vent. I tried to open the door to run outside. It was locked. Every window had been sealed shut with metal plates I'd never seen before. The phone had no signal. I was locked in. At 3 in the afternoon, I heard music coming from the basement, an old lullaby, the song muffled through the static. But along with it, there was a giggle, a child's, obviously. Then a scratching sound against my door. "Play with me, Mommy?" I had no children. I'd never had a family. I'd lived alone since I was a child. So who was that child? I began to doubt my own memory. Had I been here before? Had I been part of some bloody story erased from my memory? Everything in the house began to feel strangely familiar. The broken mirror in the bathroom, the eyeless doll on the shelf, the armchair with dried blood. That night, I dreamed of a black door in the middle of a foggy forest. I opened the door and saw a copy of myself, but the face was completely different. Sunken eyes, ashen skin, mouth sewn with bright red stitches. It looked at me, whispering, "You're not real." I woke up, my throat tight as if being squeezed. There were red stitches scattered on the pillow. When the clock struck 4:44 a.m., the door to my room opened by itself. I heard footsteps running around the house, but no one could see. Lights flickered. Moans echoed from the walls. And from somewhere, my voice, my own voice, calling to me from the basement. "Hurry! You have to remember, before it erases everything." I fell to the floor, my mind spinning. Everything was falling apart. Then, the sound of a piano came from downstairs. I didn't have a piano. I walked down the stairs. Each step felt like I was stepping deeper into a never-ending nightmare. And there, in the middle of the living room, was someone. No, something, sitting on a chair, back to me, playing that familiar lullaby. The same song. I had heard in the psychiatric ward when I was 9, and then it turned around. No one could remember the exact day Ansel set foot in the town of Briar's Hollow, the small town hidden in the mountains to the north, where the thick fog seemed to drown everything in oblivion. Ansel was a 34-year-old freelance reporter, his eyes cold and his voice slow as if he were weighing each syllable. He had come here to investigate a strange disappearance. The entire Heron family had vanished without a trace after a night of pouring rain. But what was even stranger was that the town was dry. No one seemed concerned or curious about the incident. Everyone avoided the name the Herons. It was as if they had never existed. Since arriving here, Ansel had been having strange dreams. In them, he stood in a red-hot room with rotting wood floors underfoot and bleeding walls. There was a knock on the door, 3 slow, steady beats that echoed as if from deep underground. On the 3rd night in Briar's Hollow, the knock was no longer a dream, it was real. 3 beats. At 3:17 a.m., Ansel opened his eyes, his heart pounding. Outside the window, a thick fog wrapped the house like a shroud. He walked down the stairs, his footsteps echoing strangely in the chilling silence. There was no one at the door. But in the middle of the old carpet on the porch, there was a strange object. A small, dark wooden box, the size of a hand, unlocked. Ansel carried it inside and placed it on the table. The box smelled like human ashes, but it contained only one thing: an old cassette tape, labeled in scribbled handwriting, recording 9:15 p.m., Harron House, last night. Ansel could not resist the urge. He took the tape player from the old wooden cabinet in the boarding house. When the buzzing sound came on, he held his breath. The tape opened with the sound of wind whistling through the window, followed by hurried footsteps, then the distant sound of children giggling. But the laughter lasted unnaturally. It morphed into a high-pitched scream that did not belong to any child who had ever lived. A woman's voice, muffled, as if someone were gagging her. "We shouldn't call its name. Don't let it know we're looking. Don't let it know." Then silence, then whispering, dozens, hundreds of whispers, all mixed together like a haunted church chanting at the bottom of a well. The tape ended with a terrible sound, a piercing scream, then a heartbeat, not human, but as if from some gigantic creature buried underground. Ansel pulled the tape out, his hands shaking, but that was only the beginning. The next morning he went to the town library. The records showed signs of tampering. The Harrons, no records, no photos, as if wiped clean. But when Ansel asked the old librarian, she just stared at him, her lips moving as she said one thing: "Don't dig up what's buried, not because it's dead, because it's sleeping." The warning didn't stop Ansel. It just haunted him more. He decided to go to the Harron house. Located on the edge of town, the three-story wooden house looked as if it were about to collapse. The door was unlocked. The inside was covered in dust, cobwebs, and a musty smell, as if the place had been sealed off for a long time. In the living room, he saw something strange: an old mirror, its brass frame dull, hanging precariously. On the surface of the mirror there were scratches shaped like fingernails, and in the middle of the mirror was a line written backwards, only visible through the camera of his phone: "I'm still here." The strange thing was that his camera wasn't on. The sound of children's laughter echoed from upstairs. Ansel turned. His heart felt like it was in a knot. He took one step up the stairs, each step pulling him into another layer of reality. The door at the end of the hallway creaked open. The room was empty. There was only a single bed, a headless doll sitting upright on a pillow, its hands clasped together as if in prayer. And on the wall, a picture of himself. Not an old picture, but a picture of him standing in this room. The light from the phone, the angle, the horrified face, everything was exactly right. The picture was printed on old photo paper with bloody fingerprints. Ansel gasped, stepped back, but the wall behind him was gone now. In its place was a new hallway, endless, dark, with doors on either side. Opening. From the depths of the hallway, something began to crawl out, slowly with the sound of bones breaking and dragging. He ran. Footsteps followed, getting closer. When he rushed out of the house, it was as dark as midnight, even though it was only 5 p.m. The streetlights were flickering. There was no one on the street. The town seemed to have been sucked out of the living world, and in the wind he heard a whisper: "Nothing is missing. Just an untold memory." The air in the small room seemed to freeze as Clara opened her eyes. She was no longer lying on her bed, as she had been the previous nights. Instead, she found herself kneeling in the middle of a cold brick room, 3 walls mottled with black moss, and the 4th wall was a ceiling-high mirror shattered into pieces, as if someone had smashed it with all the rage they had ever stored up. Clara screamed, not out of fear, but because what was reflected in the mirror was not her, but a deformed version, eyes blank, mouth agape as if about to swallow her whole. The horrifying portrait was repeated in each of the broken pieces, each with a different expression, sobbing, laughing wildly, or smirking contemptuously. The fluorescent light on the ceiling flickered, then it went out. A crackling sound came from the ceiling speaker, a familiar, hoarse voice, as if coming from the throat of someone who had been strangled. "Clara, do you remember who you are? Or are your memories just fragments written by someone else?" She stood up, her bare feet stepping on the broken pieces of mirror, stinging. Blood began to seep out, leaving bright red footprints on the cold floor. But Clara didn't stop. She pressed her face close to the mirror, looking at her reflection, each image repeating like an inescapable matrix. The mirror shuddered. Then, from the center of the shards, an arm reached out, pale, with cracked fingernails. It grabbed Clara's neck, yanking her into the mirror. She didn't have time to scream. The scene shifted chaotically. Clara fell, not vertically, but spiraling, as if she were being sucked into the center of a vortex. She rushed through distorted scenes, an abandoned school, a smoking hospital hallway, and a wall covered with anonymous smiling faces. The laughter was so familiar. It was the laughter of Eden, the sister she thought had died in the fire 7 years ago. Clara fell to the cold tile floor, a circular room with 12 doors. Each door had a different symbol engraved on it, like an ancient code, but only one door was ajar. Inside was Eden. She was standing there, her back turned, but it was the Eden of the past, her long hair hanging straight, wearing a white dress with blood on her wrists. She whispered without turning around, "I rewrote the story, but every time I rewrote, a real memory would be erased forever." Clara trembled. "I never wrote." Eden turned her head, but instead of the familiar face, there was a mask of human skin sewn together with black thread, covering a gap that had no eyes, nose, or mouth. Eden, or whatever was taking that form, spoke in Clara's own voice. "Which memories are real? Which part you chose to write, the other part was erased. Do you think you're the main character?" She ran, not because she was afraid of Eden, but because she was being slowly rewritten from within. Clara hid in one of the locked doors. Inside was a vast, endless library filled with thousands of nameless, authorless books. She picked one up at random and opened it. Each page was a segment of her memory, but it didn't match. One page listed the day her father died, but Clara clearly remembered that she was in the hospital that day, so who had been there with him? Another page described the first time she held Eden, when she herself had said Eden had been adopted years later. The truth began to slip through her fingers like sand. Clara could no longer distinguish between memory and fiction. A whisper echoed in the library. "The narrator is erasing you from the original manuscript." A rustling sound came from behind. A figure in a long coat and a white mask was using a brush pen dipped in blood to write on each page of the book. With each line he wrote, a memory of Clara's disappeared from her mind. "Stop!" she shouted, rushing to grab the book. But instead of fighting back, the figure whispered, "Want to get your real memories back? Donate a part of your body." A door opened behind him. Inside was an operating table. On it was Clara herself, lying motionless, her chest still beating, choosing life or death. Clara approached, breathing heavily. Her hands trembled as she held the scalpel placed beside her. Instinct urged her to retreat, but nature forced her to continue. Behind her, there was a knock on the door. She knew that if she didn't choose quickly, the writer would come in and write the final chapter of her life in blood. She took the knife and slashed her palm. Blood dripped onto the cover of the book, and all the memories came rushing back. The fire engulfing the house, Eden being dragged away, her mother's muffled screams, and Clara standing behind the door, not saving anyone. She had locked the door. She had written the first chapter of the deception. She collapsed. The entire library collapsed like a pile of rotting memories. Before the darkness swallowed her, the voice from the speaker rang out again. "Clara, the memories are back, but life comes at a cost. Ready to move on to the next level?" Her heart pounded in the darkness. She knew that the next level would not just be the truth, but the deepest sin itself, rewritten as punishment. Ever since that night in the abandoned woods near the old laboratory, Arlen had not been himself. He did not dare to sleep deeply, did not dare to turn off the lights, and especially did not believe in the concept of time. The clocks in the house kept turning backwards silently. The phone flashed calls from non-existent numbers. Sometimes they did not ring, they just vibrated as if something was alive inside. Arlen used to be a programmer full of reason and science, but now he spent hours sitting still in front of the screen, staring at the security camera with a blank expression. In a seemingly random moment, the tape from the camera behind the house captured the image of a man standing motionless in the rain, holding what looked like a human skull, except it was empty, bottomless. He did not look at the skull mirror, but looked straight at the second-floor window, where Arlen was standing from inside. But what made Arlen shiver was the detail. The wall behind him, where the iron fence used to be, was now just a patchy darkness, as if it had never existed. When he replayed the tape, Arlen realized something horrifying. The man in the video did not appear in his shadow. The shadow cast on the cement floor was not a human figure, but a distorted round mass with dozens of small branches that grew like tentacles, twitching. From that day on, he began to hear someone whispering in his chest, not through his ears, not through his mind, as if the voice lived with him under his ribs. At first it was indistinct words, then fragments of text. I used to be them. It was my fault for saying his name. It's rewriting my memory. One night, Arlen opened the refrigerator and found a roll of black film, wrapped in long hair and stained with dried blood. No one was home but him. But strangely, the roll had the words, "Do not watch unless you are prepared to lose yourself." And of course, Arlen watched. The old projector his grandfather had left him during the war was still in the attic. He loaded the film, drew the curtains, and turned off all the lights. The image appeared on the wall, a face, not moving, just staring into the lens. But the face had no eyes, and behind him was a dark hallway, exactly like the hallway in the dormitory where Arlen had lived 7 years before. Less than 3 minutes later, the scene changed abruptly. A door opened, the camera fell to the ground, recording the sound of running footsteps and the scratching of something with claws. A sigh sounded so close it was almost like it was pressing against his eardrum. Then suddenly, the image went black. The screen was black. White text appeared. This is not your memory, but you chose to keep it. From that moment on, Arlen no longer knew what was real and what was a dream. On the 4th day since everything had started to fall apart, Arlen received a text message. No number, no address, just the words. Memories do not come from the brain, but from those who have looked at you too long. He looked back at the camera in the bedroom. In the frame, the bed was empty. No one. But now, he was sitting there, looking straight at the screen. Arlen checked the angle again. The camera angle was fixed, no deviation. The position was the same as always. But the most absurd thing was, there was no time delay. The image was live. So why couldn't he see himself? Unable to resist, Arlen stepped closer to the camera, and when he bent down to examine the lens, he noticed a horrifying detail. The camera lens reflected not his own face, but another face, pale, lips sewn together with black thread, and eyes so wide they bled. The next day, he lost contact with the outside world. The internet was down. The phone signal was gone. The wall clock was ticking backward, as steady as a deathly heartbeat. No more news, no more traffic, no more calls. The house was becoming more and more isolated from reality, a broken space, suspended between two parallel realities. Arlen scratched a mark on the wall every time he woke up, but the wall only grew dimmer. Every time he added a mark, the old one disappeared. And then, on the 13th night, a sound appeared. A knock on the door. Not hasty, not aggressive, but steady, like a heartbeat, knocking straight into the brain. 3 times. Silence. 3 more times. He summoned up the courage to open the door. Before him was an unimaginably long hallway, one that seemed to have existed behind the apartment door for years without anyone having entered it. Fluorescent lights flickered. On the floor, words were carved into each tile. If you enter, your memories are no longer yours. And at the end of the hallway was a black door. No handle, no hinges. Only a single brass cat's eye, from which, from inside, someone was peering out. Midnight. Rain slanted against the glass doors of room 14, a vacant row of rooms in the basement of Black Hill Psychiatric Hospital. The floor had been sealed off since 2002 after a fire killed 3 patients and destroyed the entire surveillance system. But tonight, there was a dim light from a room at the end of the hallway and a knock from inside. Harlan, 27, sat alone in a torn leather chair. His eyes were empty, his hands clutching a tattered notebook, the leather cover peeling and smeared with black ink. Every time he turned a page, the writing inside changed. It wasn't his own. It wasn't his language. It was something wrong, distorted, like someone else was using his hand to write. The sounds still echoed in his ears, a screech like scratching on the wall mixed with the familiar voice of his sister Ellie, who had disappeared 10 years ago. "Harlan, don't let them see your face." He spun around. There was no one. But the door was slowly closing as if someone had walked past. The wall in front of him changed color, from sickly white to ashen gray. A scribble appeared in dried blood, a swirl of paper around an eyeless face. Harlan was an investigator who had been investigating a series of mysterious disappearances in the town of Daleswood, a town once thought to be consumed by a darkness. But the deeper he dug, the more he lost track of his memories. Every person he met on the case seemed to never exist. Files disappeared. Witnesses suddenly committed suicide. A girl named May he had saved, when he returned to find her, no one remembered her. And then Ellie, the only person who trusted him, disappeared without a trace. In her bedroom, all that remained was a cracked mirror and a note. "They're rewriting your memories." Bringing himself back to reality, Harlan suddenly heard a rustling sound under his feet. From the old wooden floor, pieces of paper were pushed up as if by a gust of wind. He bent down and realized every piece of paper was part of the notebook he was holding. But strangely, each page contained a memory he didn't remember experiencing. One of them depicts him standing in a room of mirrors surrounded by alternate versions of Harlan, each smiling crookedly and whispering, "We are not the same." The next page records a conversation with Ellie, but through the lens of a stranger, a man who calls himself Marcus, a 41-year-old former psychiatrist. The problem is, Harlan doesn't know who Marcus is, but his birth date and address match his records perfectly. Could it be that his memories are no longer his own? Suddenly, the ceiling lights flicker. A voice booms from a rusted speaker mounted in the corner. "Experiment 4327, 7th alter ego, failed. The clone is showing signs of resistance." Harlan screams, "I am not an experiment. I am me. I am Harlan." But the speaker continued. "Perform complete erasure of the 5th layer of memory. Prepare to recreate the cognitive mask." Then something slid through the crack in the door. A porcelain doll, no eyes, mouth wide open. Inside its chest was a strip of paper. Harlan opened it with a trembling voice. "Too late. They've started to attach mirrors to your memories." He jumped up, rushed into the hallway, but the hallway was gone. Instead, there was an endless U-shaped maze, the concrete walls jagged and mottled as if covered in moss. But if you looked closely, it wasn't moss, it was human skin. With each step he took, an image in his mind blurred. Ellie, her eyes were no longer clear. His house, only an empty black frame. His own voice, becoming unfamiliar. The loudspeaker came again. "Cell 4327 is rejecting the original identity layer," putting the mirror into the reflection phase. A large mirror slowly appeared at the end of the hallway. On it was a man bleeding from the eyes. His eyes were darkening, his mouth was torn open, but he was still smiling. That person was Harlan. In a panic, Harlan smashed the mirror, but beneath the broken glass was a new passageway, a red light flashing. He stepped in. No more speakers, no more mazes, just an empty room with an operating table in the middle. On the table was a body covered in a white sheet. He stepped forward. His steps were heavy. His hands were shaking as he pulled the sheet away. And what he saw wasn't a body. It was a face, his own, cast in wax. Eyes closed, but mouth still smiling, just like the mirror reflected it. Underneath the face was a line of words engraved, "Mask completed, soul attached, next is coming." The knock came again, not from the door he had entered, but from the wall behind him. He turned. The wall began to crack. Each crack was identical to the fracture of his memory. The pieces he thought were lost now came back like a nightmare. A soft laugh, the sound of footsteps, and then a face emerged from the crack in the wall. It was Ellie, but not the Ellie he remembered. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale, her mouth moving. "I told you, don't let them see my face." Harlan's entire body went numb. He couldn't scream. He couldn't back away. His body was nailed to the spot. Ellie moved closer, holding a piece of broken mirror, a reflection not of his face, but of hundreds of struggling faces. "All of us are copies you left behind in your old memories." The room shook. The operating table crumbled to dust. And the images, the police interrogation, the crying child, the cold cell, the smell of chlorine, the straps and needles, flooded back. Harlan screamed, clutching his head. But the screams wouldn't come out. When he opened his eyes, he found himself back in the same leather chair. In front of him was the notebook, and this time, on the cover was a line he had never seen before. Stage 7, memory distortion complete. Moving to extreme emotional response levels. Signed, Specimen 4327. And in the mirror, a completely different person smiling at him. No one in the group realized when time had begun to warp. When they woke up in the empty room with glass walls on all sides, the space around them seemed to be melting. Not literally, but the sense of reality, colors, sounds, emotions, was subtly distorted, making people unsure of what was real and what was not. Min, the last person in the group to remain calm, stared at the reflection. But what he saw was not himself. It was a version smiling, a cold, detached smile, as if the mirror were playing its own cruel game. Behind her, Thu's voice rang out, "That clock, it doesn't turn with time, it turns with my emotions." Her voice trembled, not from the cold, but from fear. Indeed, the clock hung from the ceiling. Whenever someone showed fear, the second hand would jump back, and when they tried to suppress their emotions, it stopped moving. "We're being watched," Duke whispered, "not by people, but by something learning to be human." Min turned to look. Duke was holding an old phone, the screen cracked. But the strange thing was, it was playing back exactly what they had just said, without a second's delay, as if it had been pre-recorded. Worse still, the voice from the machine sounded different, as if it had been cloned from their own voices, but off-key and slower. The voice of a clone. The screen suddenly went black, showing only a red line. "Floor 8, false perception. Everything you remember is fake." The room suddenly went dark. Not the lights went out, but as if the light had been sucked out by some force. And then the sound began. Not footsteps, but the sound of metal being dragged across the floor. Each time it rang out, it sent a cold wave down the group's spine. It seemed like the floor was being torn apart. Thu screamed, but no sound came out. Her mouth was wide open, her throat was convulsing, but the room had sucked all the sound out. Min ran to shake Thu, but his hand passed through her like smoke. She was fading. Pieces of her body disappeared like they had been erased from an old photo. Duke screamed and ran towards the door, but there was nothing there, just a dark space, without depth. He threw something in, no sound of impact, bottomless, no response. The scraping sound of metal came again, but this time it was accompanied by a figure. A tall, thin, multi-armed being stepped out from the glass wall. It had no face, only ripples like electromagnetic waves running across its skin. On its chest, a red spiral symbol glinted, rotating counterclockwise, just like the one in the 50 Joanna's book they had found on the previous floor. Min tried to remember why they were here. but every memory seemed to be chiseled away. Mismatched conversations, absurd repetitions, dreams embedded in reality. And then he remembered. They had never met in real life. Everything they remembered, from their first meeting to the mystery hunting trip, appeared in an online forum. A forum that when Min tried to log back in, only to be met with a warning. You cannot access artificially tagged memories. That's when everything fell apart. Thu was not his ex-girlfriend. Duke had never lived in the same city. They were profiles, created by the system to test emotional reactions when people were faced with conflicting information. They were experiments. Min screamed, not out of fear, but out of the rage of someone who had just discovered he had no choice in the first place. But the room had begun to shrink. The walls were closing in, the screeching sound like a cold wind mixed with the muffled screams. Thu was now just a faint streak of light, fading away like deleted data. Min looked at Duke, but Duke had collapsed, his hands clutching his head, his eyes wide open as if he had just seen himself erased. A small beep sounded from the old phone. Simulation over. Level 8 test. Failed. Low resistance recorded. Cognitive emotion successfully manipulated. Everything suddenly became silent. Min now stood alone in the empty room. Nothing left. No people, no objects, no himself. The glass in front of him no longer reflected the familiar face. Instead, it was someone else. The same shape as him, but with empty eyes, skin as dark as burnt carbon, and a spiral symbol glowing in the middle of his forehead, as if carved into it. "He is you," a female voice rang out from behind, smooth but cold. The complete version, no memories, no emotions, no resistance. Min turned around, but no one was there. There was only the sound of small electrical pulses and the sound of his own breathing, in the cage, the chest of a body that was no longer my own. I woke to a strange buzzing sound coming from inside my ears, like millions of flies whispering in a language that did not belong to this world. In the darkness, I was no longer sure what was real space and what was the ghost of memory. What was my name? I saw myself in the mirror, but it was not me. It was someone else. A deformed being with pale, tight skin, eyes sunken like bottomless pits, and a mouth that moved words I could not understand. I stood facing myself, but I had no control over that body. It was controlling me. I remembered entering the 8th level, the false consciousness level, and escaping the trap of the simulated mind, but the feeling of escaping now felt like a torn memory. I could no longer tell which was real and which was a shell built to control me. A voice spoke from behind me. Hoarse, each word like a knife cutting into stone. "Who do you think you are in this story?" I spun around, but there was nothing behind me. There was only an old clock hanging on the wall, its hands spinning backwards at a terrifying speed. Time slid, stretched, as if I were being drawn into a vortex of my own consciousness. I tried to cling to a fragment of reality, but every thought was falling apart. I opened my eyes again, this time to find myself standing in a sealed room, a sickly green light shining down from the ceiling. In the middle of the room was a metal table, and on it was me. Not an image, not a mirror, an exact replica, lying motionless with a round hole drilled into the middle of my forehead. Inside, something was stirring. A voice rang out from the loudspeakers overhead. "Experiment 324A restarting. Subject shows resistance. Level 9 activated. Fractured awareness level." I wanted to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the dense air. I couldn't move, couldn't open my mouth. I could only see my own image being dismantled layer by layer. My hand unconsciously touched my head. There was no blood, no wound. But I felt like something had been placed inside me, a memory that didn't belong to me. An image flashed by. I saw a child sitting and crying in a room filled with the smell of disinfectant, surrounded by figures in white coats watching him through one-way glass. Every time the child cried, the sound didn't go out but echoed back into his head, becoming his own wails from the future. It was me. It was a memory that was forced to be forgotten. I shakily stepped out of the room. The hallway curved, the ceiling dropping with each step I took. The lights flickered on and off, creating shadows that moved out of sync with my own. I ran, but the longer I ran, the longer the hallway became. The footsteps behind me grew louder and louder. Each step echoed like the sound of shattering glass, shattering, deafening, brain-scratching. Then I saw him. The man in the paper mask stood at the end of the hallway with an old video camera in his hand. Every time I got closer, he pressed record. Every time he recorded, a memory in my head was erased. I knelt, holding my head in my hands. Everything began to fall apart. What is my name? What does my mother look like? Have I ever loved anyone? No one answered me anymore. For every question I asked myself, a shadowy figure appeared behind me, whispering the answer in distorted voices, like a recording reversed. One of them leaned close to my ear. You are a copy of a copy. Your memories are just replays. No, I screamed, but all I heard was the sound of a baby crying echoing down the hallway. The cry was long, distorted, and then suddenly cut off with a click, like a tape that had been stopped mid-sentence. Images of me at different ages began to appear on the wall, but they all had one thing in common. My eyes were blank. I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed toward him, the one in the paper mask, and snatched the camera from his hand. The screen immediately showed a video of me, but not me now. Me, sitting in a closed room, rewriting my own memories. The words I had never said rang out from my own lips in the video. When the truth is too painful, people create layers of memories to cover it up. But each time they touch it, the mask breaks, revealing the rotten reality inside. The camera made a shrill sound. I dropped it. The room around me began to collapse. The ceiling peeled off, the floor cracked. Every image on the wall shattered, revealing behind it the video screens of myself, like a never-ending movie. I crawled through the ruins, my eyes filled with tears and panic. But then I saw an elevator. The elevator door opened silently. Inside was a single button, floor 10. I had no choice. I stepped in, shaking as I pressed the button. As the door closed, a voice echoed, "Once you enter the 10th floor, there is no turning back." The children's music suddenly rang out in the closed space, distorted, slow like a lullaby in reverse. The red lights flickered. Then the elevator began to descend, down to the deepest place, where nothing was real, where everything had been shattered by perception. I thought the truth would set me free, that if I could just reach it, all my nightmares would vanish and I could be normal again. But I was wrong. The truth, horribly, doesn't save. It burns. That night, when my consciousness crumbled to reveal a secret door behind my wall, a door no one had ever mentioned, with no handle, I stepped inside, hoping it would be the end. But what awaited me inside wasn't answers, but a stark look into the hideous structure of the world I thought I understood. The room was dark, but I could see. Everything inside was illuminated by memories that weren't mine, hanging in the air like fragments of film, flickering like the blurry recordings of an outdated camera system. I found myself, or rather versions of myself, locked in the lab, mentally tortured by voices blaring from wireless speakers. "Who are you if your memories are designed?" A voice spoke. It came from nowhere. It breathed into my consciousness as if it were inside my skin. It had the timbre of the mother I never had, the tenderness of a murderer cradling a corpse. On the wall in front of me, a screen appeared. I, the original version, knelt on the floor, covered in blood, crying as I realized that everyone around me was a simulation. My closest friends, my first love, even the dog I held every night. All were the result of a programming sequence. It wasn't just my memories. Every emotional response, every decision, every mistake, it was simulated and pre-written by a system called Recon. I backed away, my hands shaking, but the room wouldn't let me escape. The wall behind me was gone. There was no way out. A shadow began to appear in front of me. It was roughly my own shape, but it had no eyes. Instead, there were two deep holes with pulsing veins, oozing black fluid. With each step it took, my memories were peeled away, bit by bit, as if it were eating away at the layers of emotion I had hidden. You're not the original. You're the result of a failed experiment. You're just a script, playing a game of resistance. The voice came from my own head. No, it came from the me on the other side of the screen, the real me, the one who had created all these layers of memories just to see how many variations one emotional response could produce. And suddenly I understood. Every layer my journey, from curiosity to disbelief to fear to panic to despair to awakening, was just a test of consciousness. A program called Ascension Simulation, Consciousness Breakdown Protocol 13. I was not the narrator, I was the subject, and what was watching me from the other side of the glass was me. I screamed. I tried to tear my flesh, as if to dig out some chip that was emitting a signal. But nothing happened. I was real. The blood was real. The pain was real. But then, why did I still hear the sound of the system rebooting? Rebooting protocol, the final truth layer. The lights flickered, the screen shook, the sound of metal clashing. And then, I was brought back into another room, exactly like the room I thought was home. On the wall there was a new photo, a photo of a girl named Ellen, with a face similar to mine but with completely lifeless eyes. A voice spoke, this time with a chilling gentleness. Welcome, Ellen, to the 89th test. We will observe your emotions when faced with the truth. Don't be afraid. If you don't remember anything, that means the algorithm worked well. I no longer had the strength to resist. I looked into the mirror. Who am I? The mirror reflected nothing. There was only a black screen and the sound of a heartbeat, not mine. It belonged to the person watching me through the control system. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The screen in front of me lit up once more. Text ran across. Sympathy level, 12% reality. Awareness level, 37%. Command resistance level, 2% conclusion. Ellen is suitable for restructuring the first floor. No, not anymore. I slammed my head against the wall. Every memory fragment instantly shattered into red data fragments that fell to the floor. I saw each of my memories melt like ice, then digitize 0101001111000110. An arm reached out from the darkness. No skin, just cables, pipes, and joints. It pulled me closer. Memories are prisons, but they are also paths. Move forward, Ellen, or be trapped here forever. And I moved forward, because I had nothing left to lose. I passed through the final door, where all the layers of memory converge into a single point, a heart beating in midair, connected by hundreds of wires. I am the one who created it, but I am also the one who is swallowed by it. It is the final layer of truth, where the observer and the observed become one, where the audience is no longer distinguished from the character, where you, the one listening to this story, ask yourself, did I dream? Or am I just a layer of memory in someone else's system? If you are still listening, leave a dot to confirm that you have also entered the final layer, and please do not believe in the mirror anymore. It no longer reflects you. Are you still here? That means you survived all 7 levels, or you think so. Do you feel like things have changed? The room you're sitting in, the light behind the screen, or your very presence in this story? Is it real? The final level is not the end, but the beginning, where all the truths are revealed and old beliefs are shattered. Perhaps you've realized the scariest things are not the monsters, not the darkness, but the little truths, the unanswered questions, the memories that don't belong to you, that keep repeating like a corrupted programming code. Darkness Tells is not just a story. We dissect the human mind, every crack of reason, every shred of emotion, and give it back to you in the form of stories you will never forget. You see, it all starts with a tiny doubt, a click, a video, a story. And then at some point, you're not sure what's real anymore. Sound of lights going off, click. If you think you're out, congratulations. But if there's a knock on the door at 3 a.m., if you see your face on the screen before the mirror reflects it, or if someone whispers this story in your ear when you never turned on the video, remember, you agreed to listen, you chose to continue, and once you reach the final layer of truth, it won't be us who's watching you anymore. Countdown sound, 3, 2, 1. If you find a part of yourself left somewhere in this journey, click like to keep it, subscribe to protect the rest of you before the next level opens, and share this video to the person you trust the most if they still exist. Darkness Tells, where darkness not only tells stories, but also leaves an echo in your heart forever.